All right, we're going to begin this video with a quick math joke, and that is, what do you call a parrot that won't eat? And this is a hint towards our next chapter that we're going to be learning about. The answer is a polynomial, which means we're going to be studying polynomials in the next chapter. So beginning chapter 4, we're going to talk about polynomial functions. And today, specifically, we're going to just talk about some key terms that relate to polynomial functions. Some terms that you've probably heard of before, might be a little bit of a review, and then we're going to do a few different little assignments on Delta Math to go along with it. So the first thing we need to do is define what a polynomial function is. Polynomial, that word means many terms. Poly means many, nomial means term, so it means many terms. Polynomial doesn't necessarily have to have a ton of terms. It could have just 2 terms, or it could have 8 terms or whatever, but it follows some general format. So sort of the math language for a polynomial function is a function of this form. F of x equals a sub n x to the n plus a sub n minus 1 x to the n minus 1 plus dot plus a sub 1 x to the 1 plus a sub 0. Now, what does this mean? Well, essentially what this means is a function that looks sort of like this. F of x equals 3x cubed plus 5x squared, let's say minus 4x plus 10, something like that. That would be a polynomial. So if you were to sort of look at what the n means in this function form here, the n is sort of your highest power. So in this case of the example, we have 3 was our highest power, and then so the a sub n minus 1, all those, the a sub, all of these, a sub 1, a sub 0, those are just constants. So basically it's some x's with some constants that have been added and subtracted together. So like the a sub n would be 3, that'd be actually a sub 3, and then we have x to the third. And then the n minus 1 means you just subtract 1. So the next term would be the one that goes with x squared, and that would be 5. That'd be a sub n minus 1, all the way dot. You could have a number of terms in between there, depending on how high you start. Then a sub 1 would be 4, negative 4, x to the first power, and then a sub 0 is just a constant. It's just your final constant at the end. So this is just sort of math language. Don't get too bogged up on what that actually means. But the key thing here is that our exponents in a polynomial function must be positive integers, which is the case with all of these. Doesn't matter if they're 99 or 100 or 5, but they could not be things like negative 3. You could also not have fraction exponents. So this means no negative or fraction exponents. Which also means 2 other things. If something is a negative exponent, another way that we write that would actually be in the denominator of a fraction. So in other words, if it's not a negative exponent, that means we can have, we're going to say no variables in the denominator. And then how we get fraction exponents is actually if we have something like a square root or a cube root as over a variable. So no variables in the denominator or roots. So we can't have like the square root of x. That would not be a polynomial. Or we can't have the cube root of x or the fifth root of x squared. Those would not be polynomials. Because denominator variables give us negative exponents, and variables inside of roots give us fraction exponents. So these are just restating the same thing. That's how we come up with these exponents. So our exponents must be positive integers. We could also have a function that might even look something like this. F of x equals 3xy minus 5y squared. That's still a polynomial. It's okay to have more than one variable as long as they're all, again, positive exponents. So that is a polynomial. All right, let's look at just a few more words here. The first one is standard form. Standard form is a polynomial written with the powers in descending order. What that means is if we have, let's say, a function like f of x equals 3x plus 7x cubed minus 4x squared plus 10. Right? That is a polynomial, but it's not in standard form. Standard form is generally what just looks right. It looks kind of out of order, right? Because you have the 3x first, and it looks like the x cubed should be first. So descending order just means 7x cubed minus 4x squared. Then we throw in the 3x and then the plus 10. So that's standard form of a polynomial, which we'll talk about in delta math. The degree of the polynomial, if you've heard of that term before, is just basically the highest power of a given term. So if we were to see a function like f of x equals 4x minus 3x squared, the degree would be 2 because that's the highest power. Now where it gets a little bit challenging, and we'll see this on delta math probably, is let's say we have a term like 10x squared y minus 5x. The degree of this thing, the degree is not 2, even though that's the highest power, because this whole thing here is a term. So there's an invisible 1 up here with the y. So the degree of this one is actually 3. And we'll get a little more practice on doing that. But you have to sort of add up all of the exponents for a given term. So it's the highest power of a given term. Not necessarily a given variable, but a given term. All right, and then last one that we'll talk about until we get to our video is the leading coefficient. The leading coefficient is just the number in front of the term with the highest degree. So in this case here, the leading coefficient of that one would be 10. You've probably heard of that one before. Up here in the other example, the leading coefficient of that one, the term with the highest degree was 2, so it would be -3 for that one. Make sure you include the sign with it as well. The degree is -3. Let's go ahead and we're going to look at one thing on delta math, and then we'll come back to this here in a sec. All right, so let's look at our first activity we're going to do here, and that's classifying polynomial. So let's take this first given one here. It says determine if this expression y to the 5th minus 10x squared y to the 4th is a polynomial or not. So that's the first thing. What we're going to look for are all of the exponents positive integers, meaning positive whole numbers. And yes, they are. Y to the 5th, x squared, y to the 4th. Yeah, they're all positive whole numbers, so it's good. So it does represent a polynomial. All right, now we're going to have to name this polynomial. You've probably seen these terms before: monomial, binomial, trinomial, or none of the above. And I'm sure you can figure this out, but a monomial, mono means one, right? Monomial, like a monorail or a monocycle. I guess call it a unicycle, but monorail means a single rail. So monomial is a one term. If we have two terms, it's called a binomial, like a bicycle. And trinomial is with three terms. And we don't actually really go beyond that and naming them. So that's the only options we have, or none of the above. So this one, it has two terms. This is a term, and this is a term. This is one whole term because it's just multiplied together. So multiplication implies a single term. So it's a two term, which makes it a binomial. And then the degree of this binomial is, okay, so get a little bit challenging here. Degree is the highest, the term with the highest power. So this one has a degree of 5. This one actually has a degree of 6 because we got 2 plus 4. So the degree overall of the whole polynomial is a 6th degree. Okay. Let's go look at the next one. Determine if the expression 3s, okay, 3s is a polynomial or not. So think about the variables in this thing. The variable happens to be an s, but does the variable have positive integers as exponents? Well, yeah, it does. There's just an invisible 1 up here. It's the only variable, so that works. So that would be s. So it does represent a polynomial. This is a one term, right? So it's called a monomial. So it only has that one term there. In the degree, well, it's just going to be 1. All right, next one. Show that one more here. Determine if this is a polynomial. So this one, m to the 5th over n. So our restrictions here were that you cannot have a variable that has a negative exponent, which means in the denominator. In this one, we do have a variable in the denominator, the n is. So this disqualifies it. It is not a polynomial because it has a variable in the denominator. So all we have to say is does not. Remember, it would also be the case if we had a variable inside of a root. I will actually show you this one as well. Could be a little confusing. All right, so determine if this is a polynomial. So we need to think about, are all of our exponents positive integers? No variables in denominators, no variables in square roots. This one actually is a polynomial. The negative y here first, that just has an exponent of 1, right? This you might think, well, you got a radical 6, so that disqualifies it. Well, the constant is in the radical. Radical 6 is just some sort of constant. It's, yeah, I don't know, it's like 2 point something. So it's okay if a number is inside of a radical, but we can't have a variable inside of a radical. So this is actually okay. And then we've got first power and first power, so it's good. So this is a polynomial. The polynomial is a binomial. It has 2 terms. And the degree of this is a 2nd degree because over here we've got 1 plus 1. So that's 2. The other one is just a single. So that is a 2nd degree polynomial. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's go ahead and look at the next one that we're going to be doing. And while we're at it, let's actually do this standard form one real quick. So we already talked about that. So you're supposed to rewrite this polynomial in standard form. All you need to do is rearrange it. So just identify the highest power, which in this case is a 4th power. Put that one first. This should be a piece of cake for you guys. So make sure you include the sign. The negative 10 goes with it, x to the 4th. And then we've got a minus x cubed. And then a plus. So since there's no sign in front of that 1/7, it's a plus 1/7 x squared, and then plus 1. So just put them in descending order, highest to lowest. That's really all there is to it. I don't think we need to do any more of those. All right, and then for our last one, I want to show you just a few more vocabulary words here. And that is when we talk about polynomials, we can call them there's certain words that we call them based on their degree. So we're going to go over those real quick here. So first of them would be a degree of a 0. So 0 degree. That would be actually something just like a constant. Actually, let me use a colon here. So that would just be like the number 3. That actually is a polynomial. 3 is a polynomial. Even though it's one term, it's still actually polynomial. It's a monomial. So like the just the expression 3, that would be a 0 degree. The reason why is because it's really like 3x to the 0 power. You can think of it in that way. Because anything to the 0 power turns into 1. So this actually becomes 3 times 1, which is just, well, 3. So if you just have a single constant, that actually is a polynomial of degree 0, and the name is a constant. All right, if we were to have a first degree polynomial, something like 4x, so that does have a 1 first degree, right? Because there's a visible 1 up there. This is called a linear equation. Seen those a lot in your life. Linear equation. If we have a second degree polynomial, something like 3x squared, and you could have more with it. You could have like minus 5x or whatever. But the highest degree is what we're talking about. So if it's x squared. Think about what that's called. It is called a quadratic. All right, the next one, if it's a third power, something like maybe negative 5x cubed, and again, there could be a lot more. Let's say plus 1. The third power there, let me think what that's called. That is called a cubic. You might have heard that term before. If we have a fourth degree, let's say, just say x to the fourth minus 3x. This is called a, think about, if you think back to units of measurement, something with four of these in a gallon, it's 4 quarts. So this is called a quartic. Kind of a fun word to say, quartic. And last but not least, this is really all we, go. Not sure what happened there. All right, sorry. The last one would be a fifth power. So negative 3x to the fifth, say. This is called a quintic. You don't really use that word much, but there it is, quintic. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our last Delta Math assignment here, polynomial vocabulary. We have a lot of questions to answer about this one. All of these are going to be polynomials, so you don't have to worry about deciding if it is or not. So the first one, we have option. It says the expression is a, there's those words. All right, a blank polynomial. So what we want to do is find the highest power, i.e. the degree. So this is a first degree. If it's a degree 1, that makes it a linear equation. So linear. With how many terms? Okay, well, terms, each term is separated by a plus or minus sign. That's a term, that's a term. It gives us 2 terms. The constant term, okay, so we're just looking for a constant. That's the number without a variable. It's 1/9. Constants are numbers without variables. The leading term, okay, so we haven't actually talked about this word yet, but the leading term goes along with the leading coefficient, and that is if we were to write this thing in standard form, which would be x plus 1/9, that would be standard form. The leading term is the first term. So leading term is the first term in standard form. In other words, the highest degree to lowest degree. So the leading term, or the first term, would be just x. And the leading coefficient is going to be whatever number is attached to the leading term, the constant attached to it. This one is not 0 because there is a number with the x that is not 0. If it was 0x, then it just wouldn't be there. There is that invisible 1 we have to worry about there. So leading coefficient is actually 1. So lots of terms you need to be familiar with in terms of polynomials. All right, this one's a little more challenging. All right, this expression is a blank polynomial. So first thing we want to do is find the biggest power, the degree. That's going to be fifth degree, right? Fifth is a quintic. Right there. How many terms? So we count each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 terms. The constant is right here, -1. Don't forget the negative sign. The leading term, so if we were to put this in order from the highest to lowest powers, that would make this one be negative x to the 5th over 9. Now note, this is a polynomial because the variable is in the numerator. It's okay to have a fraction, you just can't have a variable in the bottom of the fraction. So if we're going to put this in order, we don't need to rewrite the whole thing, but that one would be the first term, right? Next to the fifth. So the leading term is going to be that. Negative x to the fifth over 9. And last but not least, the leading coefficient. Maybe a little bit challenging. You actually kind of need to think of this a little bit differently. This thing is equivalent to negative 1/9 times x to the fifth. That would probably actually be a more common maybe way of seeing that. But essentially there's a 1 in front of here, and we're just sort of pulling the constant out in front. So that would make it negative 1/9 as the leading coefficient. And there we go. All right, let's do one more. Oh, looks the same. All right, well, person wants to do this one. Okay. All right, this one, the expression is a blank polynomial. So find the biggest power. Biggest power is a fourth. Oops. That makes it a quartic polynomial. How many terms? We've got 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms. The constant term is going to be this plus 1. Whoops, just 1. The leading term, so if we're to put this in order, it would not change. At least the first term wouldn't change. It's going to be the negative x to the fourth. It's our leading term. And last but not least, the leading coefficient is just the number in front. This one has a negative 1 in front. You can't see the 1, but it is there. So it would be a negative 1. All right, that wraps it up. Good luck with this, and reach out to me if you have questions.